Welcome everyone on the second lecture of the lecture series No More Architecture, curated by Karolina Plašková and organized by collaboration between Brno Gallery of Architecture and Faculty of Architecture at Brno University of Technology. This lecture series deals with the topics of degrowth and understands architecture as a part that it has a share on a global crisis we are facing right now. My name is Viktórií Mravčákovou, and I'm going to be your moderator for this lecture tonight. And first, I will briefly introduce the format of the lecture. Everyone is welcome to join either YouTube or Teams, and you are very welcome to share your questions or comments in the commentaries below. And after the talk, there will be the discussion, if you prefer, you can also raise your hand and talk directly if that's a better option for you. This lecture series was supported by Ministry of Culture, and let me finally introduce our guest, Fran Edgerley. Fran is partner of the architecture and design collective Assemble, with whom they work to look critically at the processes that produce our built environment. Fran's work is focused on the possibilities in the collective and cooperative relations created by different social and environmental structures. She's currently working to develop a new social center in London as a resource to challenge the commodification of land and property. Over the past year, she has also been developing a film on the invisible architectures of language. Welcome, Fran. I think the screen is yours.
Karolina, are you still there?
Yes, we can hear you. I think that's perfect.
Sorry again?
Sir, I think we can't see you, but it's fine, I guess. Huh? Frank, can you also turn on your camera?
Will you be introducing the beginning? Or?
I already...
no, actually everything should be said by Victoria. That was the agreement, but I think she will manage that.
Okay.
But I'll write them what's happening. But I think that they give a few minutes to the audience to connect.
Right, so I think we wait a couple of minutes until everybody connects. Sorry, Fran, we are, all the people are actually on YouTube seeing our lecture, so I don't think we can wait. We have to wait for anyone. We can start lecture now. I already said the introduction. Yes. Frank, can you hear me now? Frank, can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes, I can.
Ah, sorry. I already managed to introduce the lecture and also your bio. I already mentioned what is the lecture about. So I think the floor is yours now.
Okay. How many people are here? Just because I can't see them. And then
40 people on the YouTube.
okay, great. Okay, hi. Hello, everyone. I'm going to try and speak slowly and also to, continue, just to hold this space in a good way. It feels quite strange because I can't actually see any of you. So I'm just sitting in the office, kind of talking to my laptop, which is strange. But anyway, here we go. So hi. My name is Fran Edgerley. I'm a member of Assemble, the design and architecture collective, who've been working together for the past just over a decade now. We started off by working on kind of self-initiated projects, looking at underused spaces, and since then have gone on to work on quite a broad practice, thinking at a range of scales and trying to work in different ways with different groups of people to interact with their environment and the way that space is produced and reproduced around them. Sometimes this has meant kind of material experimentation to create spaces, or designing social structures as a way of developing program. We also do a bit of work which is more focused around, I guess, business development, business planning and organizational design, as a way of trying to think about how space is used and what kind of culture it can support. And so this sometimes takes an architectural form. So for in this studio development we did a number of years ago, the idea was to design a frame which then the tenants could inhabit and kind of recreate and adapt the space to their own needs. Our studios, these are all pictures of Sugar House Studios, where our office is a huge part of kind of the culture of the practice, which is originally had its roots in kind of making and I guess like having a hands-on relationship to the production of projects, building things ourselves, which has then since expanded to developing studio buildings, which we run, and supporting a kind of a broader ecosystem of different makers and artists to share space and collaborate in different projects. And I guess, often the question in our project is trying to think about how does physical space and architecture, both visible and invisible, start to express organizations and activities contained within it. I thought I'd just briefly introduce the practice itself and talk a little bit about how we work, and then I'll talk a bit about some interesting practices and projects I think would be good to have a look at, and then go into a little bit more detail about a few projects that we have done as a group. So this is our kind of collective evolution over the past 10 years. You can see we've just started a group of friends, basically kind of working informally together to make things happen, building things, and then slowly over time that's kind of gone through various iterations of organizational structures, which have become more and more formal and more related to kind of administrative tasks in the group. So there's about 16 partners now, and we have 5 employees. We started off as a kind of larger group of 20, just like non-hierarchical group. And I guess with a group of friends coming together to develop a practice through an interest in learning and developing projects collectively, there's a kind of constant balance at play in lots of different ways. So these are some of the things that we are constantly kind of navigating in the way that we're working. And so that part of that is about knowing the limits of your own experience, but also knowing the use that you bring to any situation, and that's internal within the group, within the practice, and also outside the collective when we're working with clients and communities. The kind of difference and exchange between individual freedom and collective responsibility. The importance of making space for difference, acknowledging that people are different and you need to make space for kind of open-ended process, and then also taking action. And then something which we often have explored in the past is this kind of interplay between the idea of craft and when manufacturing as a kind of like mass production process. A lot of the work that we've done together as a group has been around how we work as a group. You know, we have endless meetings basically trying to think about how to work together to produce projects. And often this is, you know, it's always amazing to me that you spend so long in education, especially if you're training to be an architect, but also in general, most of the education you experience never really teaches you how to talk to people or how to have a meeting with people. And this is such a fundamental aspect of like the way that we exist in the world, and yet we never really talk about that kind of core relational practice. So this is something that we constantly try and revise and address and think about within the group. This is kind of this is actually out of date, but I just wanted to show you the kind of organizational structure that we have within the practice. So when we started out, we had one company, and then, which is the one on the right hand side, you can see Assemble Studio CIC, and that was a kind of legal organization which could enable us to do work that had a kind of more charitable focus. It's kind of a non-profit organization, but what we found over the course of the past 10 years was that we kept on setting up new businesses as a way of developing projects. So we were setting up contractors to do construction projects. We were setting up Sugar House Studios, which was a kind of studio management organization. We set up Granby Workshop, which is an experimental architectural ceramics manufacturer in Liverpool. And we kept on doing this. So we thought actually the way to start to bring all these companies together is to create a partnership over the top. So now we have this kind of umbrella situation where we have a partnership and then we have a number of different subsidiaries. That means that we can do different types of work. So, do different types of work and access different kinds of funding and work with different types of clients, deal with different types of insurance. So it's quite useful. This perhaps is quite illegible in its current form, but I just wanted to show you as if the blue dots are the yellow dots are all the different partners in the group, and the blue dots are projects that everyone's working on. So you'll see that basically everyone works on lots of different things at different times, often collaborating with each other, sometimes more isolated depending on the kind of focus of the work, and everyone kind of shares management group roles as well. So I wanted to kind of preface this talk by talking about the way that we relate to each other within the group, because I think it's really important to talk about that as an important way of trying to think about how we then approach ideas of designing and thinking of space. Because for us, there's a kind of feedback loop of practice, projects, creating things that we've learned through our collective practice, then we try to create in the world, and then that kind of feeding back into the practice, and it's kind of ongoing process of learning and evolving. Part of that process, which is currently underway, is thinking about some of the, I guess, structural issues that exist within society today and how we can start to both understand how those are reproduced in the practice and also start to address the trends that they lead to. So we started talking a lot more about what it means to be a woman working in architecture, what it means to be a woman working in Assemble, both in terms of your like interpersonal relationships, how you feel in meetings and when you have exchanges with external organizations, but also over time what the kind of trends are in terms of women's relationship to the delivery of large-scale architectural projects and the kind of movement towards doing things that aren't that and trying to question that and make space to for things to go in a different way. This is just a kind of illustration to show another piece of work that we've been doing around, I guess, in reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement, trying to think about how to think about white supremacy in our practice and address structural racism and its reproduction through our work. So yeah, these are kind of live conversations that we're having at the moment. And the practice is like an ever evolving, ever changing structure that is never really static for very long. It's like kind of trying out models of ways of working together and then starting to produce projects through that and then develop the organizational structures in light of people's needs changing and responsibilities shifting. So this slide is, I guess, to try and represent this kind of what we probably understand as the traditional and definitely historic or conventionally the historic understanding of how architecture is produced and what it is produced to symbolize and what kind of stories it tells in the world. So we have the pyramids of Giza and also the Shard in London, and these ideas of like them being, architecture being a way of kind of giving physical form to power structures and economic structures that exist in a given society and kind of demonstrating the kind of potency of those structures. I think Esther Choi is a really incredible theorist who's wanted to quote here. It gives a good question for us all to think about and something which I hope the rest of the talk will address, which is how might we reorganize ourselves whilst we are embedded within the system and thus participate in it? How might we think of alternative institutions, more ethical modes of conduct and unseen opportunities to level the playing field a bit more? In an economy and society that privileges individualism, privatization of the commons, that is our social and ecological resource as well as continual market growth. What does it mean to come together to think and envision a place collectively? And I think that feels like a really important question, you know, this idea of collectivity and communality, especially at this moment in time when, especially in, I mean, I can talk about the situation in the UK, but I'm sure this is mirrored by a lot of your own experiences. That during COVID, definitely, you know, there's been a really extraordinary movement of kind of collective organizing and communal kind of support networks, mutual aid groups that have sprung up as a way of trying to think about how we reproduce the city maybe in a different way. This is a food parcel heat map that was produced in Sheffield as a way by one of these mutual aid kind of networks, looking at the kind of needs of different areas in that city and the kind of intensity of food poverty It was made in partnership by this organisation called Food Hall Project, which is a really extraordinary space that was set up as a kind of organisation to think about what would it mean to create a kind of social architecture that can think about how we address three kind of prevalent issues with our current culture, one of which is social isolation, food poverty, and also food waste. And so there's kind of like free food to be accessed, and it's developed along kind of anarchist organizing lines, and also as a way of evidencing a type of space that potentially could be learnt from. Like how do we come together over food? What could the opportunity of like communally being able to access free food, how would that change our cultural relation to one another in our communities? And that project was really inspired by this, which is the Tredegar working medical group, which was a kind of early project in Wales, which was a way of providing public health service for local workers in the mining town in the hills of Wales, in Tredegar. And that was actually a kind of a precedent, which then became evidence for the way that the National Health Service could function across the whole of the UK and the country. So in a similar avenue to that, Food Hall also launched a couple of years ago this thing called the National Food Service. And this is a kind of like architectural project of thinking about kind of distribution of knowledge, thinking about digital architectures, connecting up lots and lots of different social eating spaces where people can access food collectively together, and to think about what that means for the communities in those areas. So it's kind of an extraordinary example of showing an architectural project which is thinking about social space and the reproduction of social space, and then creating another network above it to try and think about how that might be reproduced on a national scale. A different organisation I wanted to draw your attention to was Concrete Action, who are also based in London, are a collective, really interesting group of people working in the architectural and building professions, who do a lot of work around kind of trying to think about, I guess, like development literacy. So people understanding the processes and having access to the processes, making things really clear about how the planning system works and how the development process works, and linking up different professionals with community groups across London. SAL is a really important reference. I think this is the most probably significant example of after the Carnation Revolution in 1974 in Portugal, there was a movement of kind of brigades of architects who were embedded in local communities, developing housing projects as a kind of like very grassroots led but national process. So very inspiring event and organisation. Although we don't have any like huge civic undertakings like that happening in the UK, there are some really extraordinary projects which are proving the fact that you can be working in a specific place, developing a specific architectural space and project, whilst still addressing systemic issues. So this is an image of civic space in Birmingham, which is kind of extraordinary group of individuals who've been working very hard to develop a kind of neighbourhood plan in Birmingham. And I guess, yeah, just a final reference that I think is really worth having a look at is Observatory Favelas, who are based in Rio, in Brazil. Rio de Janeiro, and they are a kind of multidisciplinary group, which includes architects among them, who are kind of committed to the living conditions and human rights of people living in favelas. So they develop a lot of projects which are based around kind of ideas of urbanism and human rights. So sometimes that's legal campaigns, sometimes that's education projects, but it also includes the development of actual architectural space in a physical sense. So this is an image of Bella Marais, which is one of their kind of cultural developments, which is a really extraordinary arts organization based on the periphery of Rio. So yeah, I guess that gives you a few examples of people working at different kinds of scales, but thinking critically about the ways in which architecture can relate to society and politics and practice more generally. I'm just going to very quickly go through a couple of projects that we have done. So this is in Liverpool, which is a city in the northwest of the UK, of England, where in an area called Granby in Toxteth, you have this kind of triangular shape at the bottom. You can see it's a huge kind of area of Victorian terraced housing that became very infamous and has a kind of huge stigma, has a huge stigma attached to it because of the race uprisings that happened in the 1980s, 1981. But it's an area that was, although it was suffering from police brutality and intense disinvestment and areas and quite extreme poverty, the reason it ended up looking like this was because there was a kind of political initiative to demolish a lot of the housing there as a way of rebuilding properties that were less densely inhabiting the space. So therefore, the kind of property prices would rise, and people's quality. The reasoning was that people's quality of life would improve. And in the process of trying to allocate this area for demolition, the government basically bought up a lot of the buildings, and the credit crunch happened in 2008. A lot of the scale at which they were buying up houses and blocking them off from people meant that it was very difficult to develop because it was such a huge project. So a lot of the development processes kind of fell through. And it meant that people who'd been moved out of their houses were then watching their houses kind of rot for like 20, 30 years. That's still happening in a lot of places in the UK. So yeah, this was really like absolutely devastating for the communities who are living there. And in Granby in Toxteth, there was a group of residents who started to organise around this to protect their streets from demolition. They started planting in streets, kind of extending that care that you give to your own home out onto the streets, and painting the houses and picking up litter, because the council had stopped doing rubbish collection because it was condemned and the whole area was going to be demolished. But these residents started to fight to argue the case for other people to see the value in their streets and their neighbourhoods. So we were approached by a social investor who was interested in developing social housing in the area, and we spent a lot of time talking to all the different kinds of stakeholders and community groups involved in that local area. So that included housing associations and co-ops, housing co-ops, local businesses, and the Community Land Trust, which was this organisation of local residents who had been fighting for the streets not to be demolished. So we produced a kind of document thinking about how this neighbourhood might start to develop in kind of smaller incremental projects, rather than seeing it as a huge challenge for one single developer who had to come and renovate the whole thing. And I mean, the houses were in a really bad state, so we spent a lot of time kind of surveying them. Each one was in a different condition. And we developed designs that tried to be reactive to that situation, using the knowledge of the residents who had been living in these homes for the past 40, 50 years, like the changes that they had made within the structure of the terrace, and then trying to reproduce parts of those in different houses depending on the kind of structural integrity and condition of each house. So there was a lot of kind of small moments of craft that we tried to develop within the houses. We were staying in one of the houses on the street, so we were sleeping in the room upstairs. Downstairs we had the site office with the contractors in the front room, in the living room, and then in the back there was a local resident had set up a kind of cafe for the builders working on site, and so everything was kind of, and then in the backyard we were casting, we set it up as a kind of concrete casting studio as a way to make mantelpieces out of the rubble and the bricks of the houses that were being kind of reoccupied. So it's kind of giving a new use to a kind of centerpiece to the houses that really focus on the materiality of these places. We worked very closely with a group of artists and designers who were from the area to develop some of the different aspects of the houses that we designed, to create a kind of to launch an organization called Granby Workshop, which is this experimental ceramics manufacturer that's still going, and now focusing specifically on architectural ceramics, which is really great. I guess the thing that I really wanted to talk about in Liverpool is that our involvement in the neighborhood has kind of led to a sequence of like smaller projects that are all kind of interconnected and learning from one another. And in some instances, we're co-authoring the project with Community Land Trust, and some they're employing us more directly as the client. So it's kind of like an amazing relationship that's emerged over time out of kind of dialogue and mutual respect. And I guess they are a larger group of residents, and we're kind of a larger group of designers and people with varied interests and varied types of voices. So there's been a kind of like mutual journey of learning how to work as a group, as a collective, over the course of the last 7 years. So this project was really trying to think about how you give architectural form to kind of protect that spirit which the residents had shown to their streets, which was all about kind of tenacity and creativity and gardening. These are two of the houses which were in the worst state out of all of the ones that the community had come into ownership of. And the proposal was to try and keep them as a kind of as a masonry shell, so not to hide the fact that they had gone through this kind of trauma, but to keep it as a place where you could go and spend time and gather people together. So this is a model we did with kind of one of the houses being entirely just a shell with a kind of tree and a glass roof over both, so two neighbouring properties, and then the one on the left still having the glass roof, but also having a kind of little studio flat for residencies, and at the base community meeting space. And that was really important because the idea of this design was, to kind of foster the creativity, or like support the culture of creativity that already existed, and this kind of culture around gardening in the neighborhoods, but also to create a space and a building for the community that wasn't just going to be a drain on resources, like it wasn't going to cost loads of money to maintain. And the idea of having the studio flat was that you're kind of building into the design of this communal space a way of being able to generate income so that the community doesn't end up with a huge bill that it can't afford to pay in a number of years. I think one of the interesting things about this project is that there was a real push for a kind of anxiety around gentrification and the fact that suddenly all of these beautiful buildings were being brought back into use and new people were going to be moving in. Like, how do you stop the houses, the property prices from just going up, and the nature of the kind of mix of the community changing, or people being priced out? And one of the things that they've trialed, and it has worked out with this situation with houses that they've owned, is that they've put a condition on the sale of them, which means that they can never be the houses can only ever be sold for an amount which relates to the median wage in the city. So it means that someone couldn't move in, it's affordable housing, so someone can't move in, buy an affordable house off the community land trust, and then, sell it for loads of money and leave. So it's a way of like trying to build a kind of longer term relationship with the area. I know I've spoken for half an hour, so I can talk about another project, or we could start questions. I don't know. What are your feelings, Victoria?
I think you can also quickly go through this one, but maybe a bit quicker if possible.
Carolina?
I think you can show one more.
Okay. I'll try and be quick. Yeah, I guess so. This is Adventure Baltic Street, Adventure Playground, which actually came out of a public art commission for the Commonwealth Games, thinking about how to create a kind of public artwork for the neighbourhood in east of Dalmarnock in East Glasgow, which is this kind of an area of the city which is extremely poor and has suffered from huge kind of top-down master planning initiatives, which doesn't really think about the life of the people on the street. So this is the kind of streetscape. It's like huge hoarding, like lots of totally kind of inhumane environments, basically, where everything is inaccessible and not really not really relevant to people's lives. You can really feel when you're in this place that, if you're doing a master planning exercise, you're thinking in the scale of 5, 10, 15 years. And especially if you're a child living in this kind of situation, that could be your entire childhood, where you're just waiting with the hoarding there and you have no idea what's going on. So this is something that we were really interested to try and address through the project. And we did this through a kind of strategy of kind of mapping, knowledge building, developing a kind of collective set of references about what we were doing, lots of eating together, establishing a core activity on site. After that, developing a spatial strategy, developing kind of organizational feedback systems, and securing the land. These were all kind of like key parts of the work that we were doing there. So this is the kind of playground which is available when we first started work. And this is Robbie, who we've been working with for 7 years now on the project. And he really is the project. The project came much more about like developing ways of working with him, and kind of for us both to go on a journey exploring and learning about different forms of adventure playgrounds. I guess adventure playgrounds came out of the Second World War, after adults started to observe kids playing in the kind of ruins of bomb sites and recreating their own environments, and that became something which they tried to then reproduce in a kind of like systemic way. So that's the kind of root of the idea, is that this is a kind of infinitely editable, rebuildable space by children, led by children, for children, imagined by children. And this is an extraordinary example in Berlin called Kolle 37, where the kids build half of the playground, which is everything you can see every year, from scratch, based on their own designs. And every night they have to build it. They build it themselves, and the only rule is that they know that when they go home, the play workers and the people who work at the playground are going to jump on their structures. So if they're not stable enough, then they'll fall down. So, you know, and they're building like 3 stories up. It's quite extraordinary. So with the process in Baltic Street, we really wanted to have the kids on site as much as possible to try and break down this relationship, to break down this kind of totally alienated relationship to space. So when the works were going on, we still had the kids on site, and they were like occupying different parts of the site depending on what was being built. A lot of the project has been developed around having the kids interact with what decisions are being made on site, how we're making design decisions, ongoing like evolution of the space. There's lots of things that have kind of evolved in response to the organisation being a kind of open-ended process of listening and learning to the community and its environment. So now they grow food. There's like a huge kind of local food distribution service. There's an outdoor nursery that's developed on site, and it's not like an aesthetically like classically beautiful project, but it is the most extraordinary place in terms of like the way that it like is related to and embedded within its community and how it serves the people of Glasgow. So we have a kind of ongoing relationship with it, in that we go up and kind of do bits of construction or help out with kind of aspects of the administration as well. And very quickly, I'm just going to run through this other project, which is just in the process of starting up and is really exciting. If any of you, well, if in the next 2 years we can start to move again more freely, then I would love to welcome any of you to come to Princelet Street in London and see this project, which was has come out of the Edith Marion Foundation, which are a very incredible organisation that was set up in Switzerland to basically hold lands and property away from market speculation and away to keep kind of prices low for affordable housing projects and experimental land projects and lots of different things. So they have properties and land that they own and keep secure in countries all over Europe. And this is the first kind of project that they've had in the UK, which is a house, kind of Reformation era house built in 1705 in Princelet Street, which is just off Brick Lane in the East End of London, so just outside the City of London, which we are in the process of turning into a kind of a resource centre and a social centre for people working to think about how the world could be different, how we could think differently about our relationship to property and land, and how we might imagine different kinds of society. We came into contact with the house because this incredible woman, Annette Pedretti, lived there for almost 40 years. She was undertaking it as a kind of almost single-handed renovation project, conservation project. She was an architect who then became interested in cybernetics, and so she was kind of undertaking the renovation of the house as this kind of incredible like craft project, looking at different aspects of it and slowly working through it over time. But she passed away sadly a couple of years ago, and so the house is this kind of jigsaw puzzle of her mini projects. So you can see on the left here there's these wooden panels where she was making the original panels, well, replicating the original panels, wooden panels that would have made up the walls in the house to reinstate them, but she never got around to reinstating them. So there's this kind of, the whole thing has been really stripped back, and it's a really incredible space, but there's all these kind of piles of bits of staircase and spindles and different projects that she'd started as a way of trying to like return the house to its former glory. So it's a very fascinating process at the moment of trying to piece together which bits will go where eventually, and how we can start to try and do justice to her incredible energy and commitment to the house. She also set up a public, she studied cybernetics as her doctorate, so she started a kind of publishing house thinking on producing books thinking about cybernetics, which is basically a form of like thinking about systems, relational systems at every level. So she was thinking about society, initiated a school for design society. She was working a lot with people thinking about. So Gordon Pask was her PhD supervisor. He's an engineer. He worked very closely with Cedric Price on the Fun Palace project. So I guess this idea of a kind of architecture that can start to reproduce itself and learn from itself is a kind of cybernetic idea, is the idea of feedback and learning. And I think I just wanted to end on that because I guess, yeah, I think it's a really important, perhaps it feels like I've shown you quite a lot of stuff, but I think one of the things about the importance of being able to articulate different ways of working and different ways of relating to space and relating to the idea of architecture is that there are, you know, is an extraordinary breadth of possibilities in the world and the way that you can start to practice. And hopefully by showing you a whole host of them, you can start to see how you might be able to look at things like this, which is the REBA stages. In the UK, this is used as a way of like how you approach stages of work in architectural projects, and start to think a bit more critically about like how this approach to practice has been defined, what kind of interests have been invested in the creation of this sequence of work, and like where your role ends and where it begins, and like actually how could you reconceptualize what your potential might be. So yeah, I hope that's given some food for thought about possible ways of reorienting yourselves. And yeah, thank you for listening. I'm going to quit. Oh, great.
Thank you, Fran. Yeah, thank you, Fran, very much for amazing and very contentful lecture.
It's a lot, sorry.
Maybe I would maybe kind of follow in the discussion. I would just invite everyone to post their comments into the YouTube session. You are very welcome to do so. But I would maybe start a discussion about this kind of collective working, and you showed really nice examples of how you like to work and what kind of rules do you create in your collective to share this or like to kind of create a common understanding. But there are certain, you also say or claim that you are a multidisciplinary studio, and I would really like to ask, what does it actually mean for you, or like how do you overcome basically these disciplinary differences, or if even the disciplinarity plays a role, kind of, or it just disappears completely? I don't know, it's more a thought than a question.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting and difficult topic, and something which we definitely struggle with in terms of, you know, starting off kind of learning through the projects. We were generalists because we were really trying to do everything, and we still do try and do a lot of different aspects of projects. So, you know, building the furniture to designing the outfits that someone serving popcorn might wear, to building the project, to designing the business plans. You know, it's kind of very expansive approach, but it does mean that, you know, as we do more work, we realize, you know, we're not specialists really in any particular part, and so I think there's an importance in naivety and just like trying things out and learning and taking risks and experimenting, but then there's also an important place for acknowledging, you know, like the variety of skills and knowledge that people have who have applied their particular trade to one specific area of a project. And I think it's something that we're only just beginning to kind of reckon with. And that's true inside the practice as well, in terms of like people's different personal inclinations for how they want to work. And you know, I guess there's a tendency in the practice, so there's like 4 people who've qualified as architects now in the last year or 2 years, and there's 1 person who has a PhD, but everyone else has been working in the practice, learning through projects, and has been doing extraordinary work which doesn't have an academic accreditation, you know. And so I think it's really important that some of the things we're talking about at the moment is like, how do you make sure that you can navigate appreciating different types of knowledge and different types of expertise that might have been learnt through live practice rather than through being in an institution. And just because you don't have an accreditation doesn't mean you don't have just as much experience in actually doing the same kind of work. So it's like, and also you might be doing different kinds of work, where you might be doing the invisible kind of social reproduction of creating relationships and stuff like this, which is often done by women and often not something that gets paid for or talked about. So I think, yeah, these are all like live conversations, and something that we're, you know, constantly trying to think about.
Yeah, that leads me to a question like, how do you, or who do you talk about as someone who has the expertise also in your project in general, like when you were talking about the Baltic Street playground and talking about the children kind of taking over the the programming and everything, that I think is a very strong argument also. Yeah.
I think in that project the interesting thing about it was that we started off thinking, oh yeah, we're going to design an adventure playground, which means we're going to design huge structures and towers, and actually the process of researching what the original philosophy of that type of organization was, led us to the position which we thought actually what our role is in this situation is to try and set up infrastructure, you know, to set up the kind of the legal security of the land, to put in basic like water play facilities and lighting and like drainage and landscaping, but actually the structures should all be left to the kids. You know, like everything really is just like creating a space for permission, a space of permission and ownership where they can enact things. But that is still an architectural project. You know, it's still an architectural space, and it's like So, but I mean, it took quite a leap for us to get to the point where we're like, actually, you know, we need to design ourselves out of the design role, basically.
Yeah, I was thinking also about, like, also when you're talking about this project and also, for example, the Grand Being project, like the being present on the side is such an important thing to address. But just to speculate about it, I think it's something that a lot of social practices try to do or like consider important. However, this kind of, as I call it, the luxury of time is not always possible due to just, you know, like the budgets and all the things around. So I would be really interested in how do you manage to do this and still make it a living, for example.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess, yeah, I mean, it's very different for all of those three projects that I talked about, because Baltic Street we did when we were like a bit younger and starting out and really not getting paid very well at all. So it's kind of like we really over-invested ourselves in that project. And in the same, you know, and also in Granby, you know, we had we were kind of definitely doing a lot more work. You know, it wasn't work. It was also like building friendships and like the things which were just a part of what happens when you are on site. I guess one thing that we did in that situation was by finding opportunities to kind of bring things together means that you have more fee to be able to spend more time to make things more complex. So there was an exhibition that came up in Liverpool about which we kind of turned into an opportunity to develop the idea for the mantelpieces, and so that then fed into the design of the housing. So it's like a way of like basically marrying things together to create space for more things to emerge. With Princelet Street, which is the last live project that we're just starting, I mentioned, that is actually something which we really now no longer can do. We're much more responsible for one another's earnings now, and there's we have employees now. It's a very different situation. So basically, I think with that project, what we're going to do instead is that we're just going to have to use that site as an office to also do other work, so that we can be on site and not necessarily be costing the project time, but it still makes a difference just to even open up the building, to allow other people to occupy the space, for like informal relations to happen whilst you can be doing other work, but in that place. So, I mean, that's one strategy we're going to take with that, but it is something which is going to be kind of difficult, I think. But yeah, hopefully it'll be possible. Yeah.
Maybe from other area, the question which might be very architectural, and that's the materiality of your projects. Now I'm thinking about it, that a lot of social practices or don't really work with the material, or like the narrative of the material and the history and archaeology of the place. So just if you could talk a bit about this, what kind of role does it play in your practice?
Yeah, I think it's funny. I think they've both just really emerged in parallel, having a kind of social ambition and an interest in the physicality of things. I think when we first started, a lot of the people most of the group studied architecture at least for 3 years, and we did the Cinerolium after everyone had done their first degree, basically. And a lot of people had just gone into practice, and they were feeling very frustrated about the fact that the education that they'd had, which was more about craft and about history and about site-specific work, was nothing like what they were experiencing in the office, and that often you were designing things, on the other side of the world, or it's for competition, which never happens, or you're, doing toilet detailing for a huge hotel. It's just like totally disembodied practice. And so the Cinerolium came out of that kind of, appetite for doing something real in physical space. And then I guess the kind of social kind of relationship or like conscience that the group has, I guess, emerged because we didn't have a client. We were making something up. It was like, how do you justify anything you're doing? And so there became this kind of abstract idea of like the public, and like what is a generous and kind of open idea of creating something joyful and playful that is going to be a kind of positive contribution to the city and transform a space in a way that feels exciting. And so I guess the social, and then it also becomes about being able to witness, being able to, once you start building things yourself and start getting engaged with understanding how things are made, then you start to look at everything differently, because you can suddenly see a building or a street as like an incredible feat of labor and time and consideration, and it really changes the way that you experience space, I think. And I think that then in turn becomes a way of trying to like talk about the importance of recognizing that fact, and that things are a craft, things are made by people, they're not inevitable. Everything is a choice that happens in architecture, and like it's a choice that is sometimes dictated by financial constraints or financial systems, or politics, or or whatever it might be, but they are contingent. And so I guess being able to see those two things in parallel feels really important for me, being able to like think about how we're creating architecture and what that means.
I'm also thinking about how these kind of projects can kind of impact the long-term political imaginaries or like political, actually just the legal system that we live in, and if you actually manage to, through some projects or the ones you were also showing as examples, if they actually manage to succeed that, or kind of if they could have any impact in this way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's quite. I mean, it's always just different. We haven't. I think there is the potential for that to happen more, but we haven't really invested our time in trying to do that at the moment. It's something I think would be interesting to look at in the future. Definitely in Glasgow, there's an appetite to try and like franchise the playground as a model, where you have adventure play plus food provision plus outdoor nursery all in one kind of site. But because they're so busy doing a project that hasn't, it's like that's a whole other piece of work. So that hasn't really happened. In Liverpool, it's interesting because although the project has got an incredible amount of positive press, actually just after we completed the houses, there was an equivalent kind of neighbourhood just on the other side of like a road in Liverpool, where an area called the Wells Streets, where there was a community trying to fight the demolition of the area, and they won the case against demolition, but the council wasn't willing to give the development project to the community because of various political kind of, I guess, actually embarrassment about the way that they treated that community. And so you can have like literally on one side of a road, a really kind of, renowned project that's thinking about different ways of developing the city, that thinks more incrementally and thinks more, I guess, about complexity and difference. And then literally on the other side of the road, the same council will be like, no, we can't do that because it's too risky and we're just going to give it to one developer. So, they're not really learning. Some people are learning, but not necessarily the right people are learning how things could be changing. I think the ambition with the third project I mentioned is that there can be a way of starting to think a little bit more strategically about how we engage with issues around land and development and city building, but we'll see how that goes.
There's a question from the public, which I would write, or like more questions, but there's one maybe it's more connected to the topics we are now discussing, and that's I would read it, but then of course also comment it. Hi, seeing you grew out of activist practice into now more responsible one. Where do you see yourself as the office heading to as a practice? And I would maybe also just comment on that, if you actually see yourself as an activist practice, like how do you relate to this?
Yeah, it's funny. No, we don't. I don't think we do. I mean, I think there's a tendency in the architectural profession to, that it's like, because there is such a kind of what's the word? Because there's such a set of conventional historic form of practice in architecture, that because we are a little bit different and we look a bit different and maybe we were a bit younger, I think there's a tendency to kind of use us as a kind of tokenistic, radical example of ways of doing things differently, but we're not. We're actually very bureaucratic. When we started, we really had no critical project at all. We had no shared idea about what we were doing with cities. I'd say, if anything, probably, at least for some of us, we're now much more politically active than we were at the beginning. But that's not a position which is shared by everyone in the practice, and it's not really a practice. So it's kind of mixed bag. We're just quite mixed group, I think. And I think how that results in the way that the practice develops is you know, it's tricky because I think everyone's in it for kind of different reasons. You know, some people really want to design beautiful buildings or exhibitions, and other people want to make books, and other people want to do research around like children's rights to space, and other people want to do like social oriented projects, and other people want to make furniture. So it's like quite, you know, it's difficult to answer with any kind of unity because we're just a mixed group. But I would say that there's a tendency to make out like we're more radical than we are. Yeah,
but your introduction was quite, I mean, political in a sense, I would say. Also.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I'm one of the. I've definitely got more political through my involvement with the different communities that we've been working in. So I think for me, it has been the process of, I guess, of kind of developing and a deeper understanding of what politics is and what it means to be operating in the world. But I don't think that's everyone's attitude.
I see another question that addresses the feminist perspective, or like the position of the women in architecture, and there is a question of what kind of tips she has or you have for women architects actually when designing actual big scale architecture, or just how do you overcome these kind of obstacles in your practice?
In our practice, well, the thing is, we're not. I mean, I think I don't really know how to give tips.
Maybe you're not an architect, right? So.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I'm still working on projects. But I guess one of the things I wanted to show you, what's it called? I'm not going to be able to remember. Basically, there's this. Hang on, let me just Google something.
That's fine.
There's parlor. Yeah, if basically one thing that you can do as a woman working in architecture who wants to do large-scale projects is to educate yourself around the fact that like there is an enormous amount of like pressure, to like social pressures, societal pressures that will lead, and like kind of general like cultures of like who has technical knowledge and who has skill, that will put pressure on you not to end up doing the architectural project. There's a really incredible piece of research that was done by this group called Parlour in Australia, which is PARLOUR, and they did this incredible survey of the architectural profession in Australia, where they show the fact that, you know, when you start studying, it's 50% women, and then over time, as you get positions of more seniority and as you get people actually becoming registered architects, the statistics just drop off. And that's for a number of different reasons, and it's not just because women are, you know, stopping work for having kids, but they're also like much more likely to become teachers or to do administrative roles or to go into like research roles, basically the roles that are not specifically about delivering buildings. And so I think through knowing that that's a trend, you can then start to think about like why that might be, and try and think about like how you can recognize tendencies in your workplace and in your education that might lead to that outcome, and to try and like, you know, challenge them, and also to just, you know, build networks between women as a way of sharing information and knowledge. One of the things we're trying to do in the practice is to set up, I guess, CPDs, like professional development talks, specifically by women who have done that type of work. So I think by seeing other people do it, and that being evidence of it being totally possible and totally normal, it dispels the feelings of uneasiness and feelings of like not feeling capable, because I think that's definitely, you know, if all of the people you're working with all the time, and all the people you see referenced, and all the people you see talking are generally men, then obviously you're going to feel insecure about like doing that work. So there needs to be ways of accessing seeing representation of other types of practice.
Do you see there a possibility to kind of make it a global? Because I think it's a issue basically everywhere. We even the statistics you said is very similar to the Czech environment, I would say. So how could we address this even on a global level, not make it a kind of a personal one, personal one? And I think it's also this is also connected to all the local projects that we do, or like and they work in this kind of small scale or like local level. If there is any way how, or what do you imagine, what are the possible networks or structures how to collaborate on a planetary level?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's quite a lot of stuff going on. I mean, I guess specifically in relation to women, there's some really interesting things going on at ETH, being partly led by Amy Perkins, who's also a member of Assemble, which is basically a series of talks looking at women and gender in architecture. And I don't know if they're available online, but they're kind of ongoing, and you can access them when they're live. That's really worthwhile.
You can maybe post it then to the YouTube session later, to the comments, so everybody can see, if that's possible.
I think there's also something that's important to recognize, which is not just about being in architecture, but just about being a woman in general, is that your experience of the world, where, you know, one of the things when we've been doing internal surveys and like reflecting on our experiences within the practice, is about, you know, it's about how people talk to you. It's about how people will look at men and address men in meetings, how people won't talk to you, how people won't acknowledge your role, how people don't get introduced properly, and how that's incredibly undermining and like continues through your whole life, basically, and your whole professional life. And it's something that I think is really important to note, because it really wears people down, and it is something that can be addressed very simply by, you know, men doing things differently. And if there's a way of talking to your colleagues about that being trends and being a true experience of what women have to go through, then I think, yeah, that's also a really positive thing to do.
I have another question, but maybe back to the projects, or like I would be very interested in the long-term strategies you are kind of developing in your projects. Like who takes over the care? How do you address this during the designing or prototyping or whatever? And how do you manage these projects to so they just sustain for a longer time after you are kind of not there? Because this question of the planner leaving the project, that's I think it's very often a critical state when things can go bad.
Yeah, I think that one thing which is huge in that is like the recognition of knowledge building as a process, as like a really important way of developing projects. And I mean that knowledge building in terms of, like, for instance, with Glasgow, what was really important was that we had a long time working with Robbie and his brother Alan, where, you know, they'd never been to an adventure playground because there wasn't any in Glasgow. They didn't know what it meant, and they'd been working in like youth services for, you know, like a decade, but they didn't know what that space really meant. And so we spent a lot of time basically going with them to lots of different adventure playgrounds, having conversations with the people that work there, you know, exploring those ideas and really experiencing them for real. And like, it was a process of knowledge building that meant that when the project started, it was their, you know, it's their project, it's theirs, and we're there supporting them to make it happen. But I think also the fact that they were, you know, they both grew up in that neighborhood. They're like incredibly well connected and belong there. So, you know, no one else can do a better job basically of doing that project than them. They are the project. So I think I mean, I guess in other, like in a different project I didn't really talk about, Black Horse Workshop, we set up a kind of integrated workshop space, which has like public workshop facilities and also like maker space and a cafe and studio space, all kind of integrated together. And that was developed as a kind of business plan and then designed as a building. And then, then it was just hiring a, kind of much more straightforward process of hiring someone once the building was complete. And so that, I guess, is a more straightforward example. I guess it just depends on what the nature of the project is. And yeah, so it kind of depends.
Yeah, there is a question on how willing are the local planners to let some things go in order to kind of try different approach when, for example, in the case of the park in Glasgow, like, but yeah, I think you already kind of mentioned it. Yeah, but yeah.
Well, I guess just to say that, yeah, although we try and, we're trying to explore, we're trying to explore kind of more nuanced ideas about relationships to space and community and community building. The way that we're delivering the architecture is still totally in line with, planning regulations. We're still going through the processes. Even with the Cinerolium, the first project, we had to do retrospective planning permission application. And so, and we're doing building control. We're doing all of the processes in a kind of quite normal way, submitting the right information, etc., etc. So just because you're trying to create new forms of space doesn't mean you wouldn't engage with the kind of systems of permission in a way that can make them a success. You don't want to undermine the ideas by putting them at risk. Yeah.
That leads me more to a question of that in Britain, but I think in a lot of countries all around the world, the architect is a protected profession in a way. And I mean, we are kind of not the notion of the architect is very narrowed to this legal system. However, we are broadening the term of architecture in general, and as you said, like new orientations, which I understand like kind of floating or like orienting yourself in a new situation in a way that kind of happened or like is happening through with the global crisis and everything. So maybe it would be interesting to me to say, and especially because you are not, like we were talking before, you're not a trained architect, like how would you, like what's with the labels?
Well, I guess, there are, the majority of the world's buildings are not designed by architects, they're designed by people working within like construction companies and or people who are just doing it without architects. But it doesn't mean that there's not a huge, importance to technical skill and like responsibility being recognized. Obviously, like it's an important thing to be able to do. I guess there's just a question of like, you can also have other things. You can have spatial practice going on, which isn't necessarily just that protected form of practice that can be creating buildings and can be creating structures, but doesn't have to relate to the world or the building industry in the same way. So I think you can have both. It's not to say that one should replace the other. It's the fact that the world is changing. There are new technologies. There's new needs emerging. It's just we need to have broader ways of involving ourselves with the world.
Yeah. So yeah, I really, because also I really understand this notion of architecture as a really like a kind of a heavy baggage that we carry around with all these historical references and everything. So yeah, maybe I want to mention like a spatial practice is kind of nice way of talking about it.
Mm.
There is one more question, a very easy one, or maybe not. Why assemble? I think. Why do you call it?
Why did we call it assemble?
No, easy one.
Well, we had a really long chat about it. At the time, it felt like a really difficult decision, but it was fine. I mean, I don't know. It's just a bad joke, really, isn't it? It's like assembling people, assembling things, kind of assembly of a collective, of a group.
I was wondering if it has the political meaning as well, but
yeah, I mean, you can. It's quite useful name. It's quite good. It can go a long way. There's actually loads of assemble architects. It's funny. There's like an assemble architect in Australia. I think there's another one in the States. There's like, there's lots of people who have the same names. It's obviously not just us that thought it was a good idea.
Yeah. Okay, I don't think we have any more questions, and I think we kind of covered basically everything what I had in mind before.
Right.
And it was very nice to talk to you, and I'm very happy also that other people joined this conversation and broadened the topics.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank you very much once again. And I would like to also invite you for the next events we are planning, such as, well, I think they're just going to be announced. I'm not sure if there's any specific date, but you can find everything on Facebook and of this lecture series. Yeah, so thank you very much for everything, for being here. Once again, thank you, Fran, for being here. And once again, thank you, Ministry of Culture, for funding this project. Okay.
I hope everyone's surviving COVID okay. Yeah. Good luck.
Bye.